Hello, my name is Kevin Lester. This is a digital version of my Capstone Artist talk, which I presented on May 9th, May 2016. I am a BFA painting major with a minor in art history, and this is about my capstone project. And welcome all to my presentation. So, this is about my series titled Nature of Divinity. It's hanging in the university gallery right now. It's a series of 8 paintings, and I'll go into the philosophy and the paintings themselves and how I actually accomplished creating them. So, here's the origin of my relevant philosophy. I was raised Lutheran until I turned 17, and after I turned 17, I left the church because it just didn't answer the questions to life that I needed it to, and I began to doubt, and yeah, so I left the church. And so after 17 years, this relationship with the church kind of left a hole in my being. So I filled up the space where theology used to be with an immersion into the life sciences. So the forest became kind of like my new church, and I began getting interested in biology and being a naturalist. My introduction to art was at PLU. I started meeting art majors in October 2012, talking to them, and they kind of introduced me to the idea that art is a viable pursuit and is actually incredibly important for society and for people to pursue. And I began getting really interested in art in general. So I took my first artist course in January 2013. I had no experience beforehand. My first artist course was an introduction to contemporary art with Professor Heather Matthews, and it was kind of jarring because I had to write essays about Jackson Pollock and Andy Warhol, and I had no experience whatsoever in the world of art. But then I began learning the techniques of visual expression through drawing and color theory and painting, and that really clicked with me quite well. I started enjoying it more and getting really into what composition, what color, and what different things in art mean to me and to the world. So this is a photography project in, I believe, 2013, and it's just one of my older pieces. So here are some of my past works. Starting with Lady Dark in 2014, I was really into realism and portraying things in a kind of photorealistic kind of way. And this painting really shows off that I can do photorealism, and that I mean, it looks really really good, and I'm pretty proud of it. And then after that, Professor Stasnos, my painting professor, had me do an abstract piece that couldn't have any formative things or anything in it, and so I started listening to some kind of electro mix, and this is what came out of that is this really techno, bubbly neon painting without any form or anything, and that kind of broke me away from realism. And then after these 2 pieces, I started drawing and painting animals more, because I was really inspired by my recent trip to Antarctica, and so I wanted to paint things from Antarctica, and I really wanted to bring that more into my painting works because I'd done a lot of photography with it. And so this is one of my paintings of a scene that I saw in Antarctica. And then I developed this more impressionist style. You can kind of see it in the penguin painting. I'm dabbing the brush more and creating more textures using the paint itself, and not hiding my brush strokes very much. And I'm relying more on composition and color and the actual theme. And so this next one is with the sunset on humanity, is very much so more impressionistic, and I'm not full impressionist. I'm not claiming to be a full impressionistic painter, but it's inspired by impressionist work, and the way I treated paint was inspired by that style. And so I like this piece in that it shows my progression towards that. So next is my artist statement. This is a statement I had been working on for about a year, and this wording has stuck with me for almost the whole time, and I really enjoy the way I've worded this. So let me just dive into it. The commonality of our time is to be removed from nature's systematic savagery and to further distance ourselves from raw, wild experience. To be face to face, connected to the same common ground, to be at equal level with the creatures and scenes Earth has to offer is a humbling, inspiring, and truly conceptual experience. Ironically, the most human of concepts, literature and art, help us to connect most with this lost world of pure wilderness. There's a lot in this statement that requires a whole lot of background knowledge into what I like to read and what I've done as a naturalist and as a writer. So here are the pieces themselves. As with the animation popping up, the pieces popped up in order of which I painted them. So without the animation, here's the order. So first I did the broad-billed motmot at the top metal, and then the chestnut-backed chickadee, which is directly below it. Then the roseate spoonbill and the red-footed booby. Those are all around the same time. They're all 16 by 20s. And then I painted the toku toucan up in the top left, Antarctica in the top right, then the Carolina parakeet in January 2016, and the common raven was finished in about March. So here's some of my inspirations for the design and concept. All these are from Western art history courses that I've taken with Professor Heather Matthews. So first off, I was inspired by Japanism, the movement that brought Japanese-style artwork to Europeans, and that really clicked with a lot of impressionistic painters. The style and the composition of these works really influenced European art after their introduction in the late 1800s. So with this piece in particular inspired me because the plum tree itself is overlapping the human element of the piece. So there's a scene going on that has to do with people in the background, but nature has overgrown it and come in front of it. And the style in which nature has been rendered has thick outlines, and I mean there's enough attention to detail that you can tell what's going on in the piece, but it's very symbolic. It has a very symbolic rendering. And then next, over on the far right, as a style, early Impressionism is that nice balance between realism and Impressionism that I feel is beautiful and represents compositions well. This piece looks a little bit like pointillism, and I wouldn't call my work pointillism, and I don't really like pointillism in general, but the idea of this early Impressionism where it's not completely realistically rendered, but it's placed. The paint is placed upon the canvas in a way that it's kind of representational of Impressionism. So in this middle piece is actually the inspiration for the whole series, pretty much outside of literature. So this piece is St. Francis preaching to the birds, Kyoto, 1299 AD, so medieval. I was inspired by the way that halos were done in like Byzantine or medieval paintings, and I really like the idea of the halo as a representation of divinity, or even a representation of intelligence or thinking. And so when I saw this piece, I said, knowing my background, I had a distaste for religion, so I didn't see St. Francis as someone worthy of wearing a divine symbol or being represented in a divine way. And so, I said to myself that the birds should be wearing the halo, not the people. And that helped me come up with this novel idea of putting halos on birds. So for conceptual inspiration, I read a couple of pieces along the way in some of my J-term courses, and these were introduced to me by Professor Charles Bergman in the Amazon and Ecuador and the Antarctica trips. So first off, the dislocation, evangelization, and contamination of Amazon crude and the Waorani people by Judith Kimmerling. This article is about how missionaries came to the Amazon and westernized the native people to a point where they become reliant on industry and Western style development, and that opened the door for them to be exploited and quarantined into these reservations, and then the Amazon itself being exploited by companies such as Shell and Texaco and Petroecuador. And now it's just an absolute genocide of the people and the animals that live in the Amazon by Western hands, starting with those missionaries that came to the Amazon. And so the other piece that was inspirational was a poem by J.L. Borges called The Other Tiger, in Spanish, El Otro Tigre. This poem talks about the different ways we see animals. And so there's one way we see animals as an empirical kind of way, where you read about the animal in an encyclopedia, or its Latin name, or how it functions biologically. And another way is how the animal knows itself, which is a way that we can never know. So how does the animal think about itself? What does a tiger think about when it's walking along the bank of a river, or when it jumps? Or what does the tiger think its own name is, and what does the tiger call us? That's something that we cannot know without being a tiger. And the third way is the symbolic tiger. It gets to a more primitive kind of human experience, where what does seeing this animal mean to you? What does this animal represent to you? What is a toucan that's staring right back at me a representation of symbolically? So I'm going to show my process of painting in acrylic with my most recent piece, Common Raven. The first and most important step to creating an artwork for me is to go out, experience, explore, and to be inspired by a certain place. So the way I do this is I take my camera and I go out into the wilderness and I find these places. So this particular example is in Eastern Washington along a river, and I was inspired by the composition of the cliffs and the river and how it all interacted, and I thought it was wonderful. And then over on the far right, I take an element from this environment that I think is pretty vital to representing the environment in general, and I was struck by the sagebrush that's everywhere in Eastern Washington, and the smells, the look of it, the way it's shaped. I just enjoy sagebrush. And then the subject itself is usually a bird that I've personally interacted with, such as this common raven that came down to greet my calls when I saw them flying around up on the cliffside. I started mimicking their calls, and two of them came down and started talking back at me. And I thought that was a really powerful experience. So I chose the common raven to be my subject for Eastern Washington. The visual design, the first date, so to speak, is I create drawings and color composition tests. I try to capture what the underlying palette of that environment is. So with Eastern Washington, there's a lot of oranges and siennas and yellow ochre that kind of make up the landscape's palette. And then I see if I can paint this in an appealing way. And it helps me to rearrange the scenery a little bit and to kind of develop the ideas as much as I can before actually going to canvas. And then with the subject itself, which is usually the most rendered part of each of these paintings, is I go through and I try to identify the key parts of the subject that make up the subject. So the raven has a big bulky bill and long flight feathers and these layers of feathers up onto its wings, and the way it looks at you and the way it's posed all make up what is essentially a raven. So it's kind of a test if I can draw and if I can represent this subject accurately. I like this drawing in particular that I did for this painting. So next, start on canvas with a charcoal sketch, and the reason I work in charcoal is because it's really easy to re-render, to redo, to rearrange on the canvas, even after I've put it down and pretty solidly. With this style, as opposed to the photorealism, I don't try to get up into the canvas and render each little detail as much as I can. I do it much more naturally and from an arm's length, so that I can rely more on the composition and the organic feeling of drawing the piece. And then after I've put down the charcoal section, I basically paint by numbers, see if I can put on a first layer, and really start building up these colors. I like to put down the overall or overarching kind of underlying color palette of the space. So all the land in Eastern Washington has this kind of yellow, sandy, yellow ochre kind of color. So that's what I started with. And that helps to get the whole accurate feeling of the space down. So then I start going through all these different steps. It's more, you could section these all into refinement, but I labeled them all and I took a lot of pictures along the way. So I like to render the bird first and start texturing the bird and giving the bird a really refined look. And then after I've rendered the bird, then I start putting down lighting and working on the environment again, or I start putting down the different lightings and the different objects into the spaces that I've quarantined for them in the piece. And the whole time I'm doing this, I'm reshaping and redrawing some of the major pieces, like the cliff sides. So continuing layering and lighting, introducing more color and midtones, and after that it's just overall refinement for the next few days if I'm working day by day. And then after I finished, the reason I know I'm finished is I look at it, I feel pretty balanced. I can look at it for a long time without feeling like I need to attack the canvas with my brush again. And that's usually how I work in general, is I sit back, look at it, and then I attack the canvas and get done what needs to get done, and then I sit back again and look at all over again, and I just go through it for a while. So once I have achieved balance, then I consider it finished. So I'm going to go through each one of the pieces. This is the first piece I did, the broad-billed motmot, and that was right after I got back from Ecuador. I like this piece in particular because it has all the elements of this series, with the human element, religion, the bird itself, and the landscape. It's all rendered in a very medieval-esque kind of way, and it's done in a way that people stop and think about it symbolically instead of looking at it as a pretty picture. Next, I did the 16 by 20s. The far left inspired by the Washington coastline. The middle one, red-footed booby, was inspired by my time in the Galapagos and the personality in the different species of booby birds there. And the one on the far right is the roseate spoonbill, which is inspired by my time in Florida with the mangroves and the beautiful stork-like roseate spoonbill. I think it actually is a stork. So then I started to get in a little bit more abstract with the Carolina parakeet. Well, not really abstract is the right word, but the Carolina parakeet is a extinct species of bird, and I wanted to represent it more mythically and more like something that's not real, but I still wanted it to be the symbol of the piece. So this bird was shot to extinction by early American settlers, and it used to have a range all the way up to New York and Wisconsin, and now it's completely extinct. And so I took a landscape from a Wisconsin farmhouse and put a parakeet, or a Carolina parakeet. I know these are the color patterns because I looked at taxidermy specimens for this piece and tried to place the different colors. It's very sectioned off. The colors probably wouldn't be this vibrant, but again, it's a mythical and unreal representation because it is an extinct bird. So, and then next I completed the common raven painting. I'll go back in time. Before those two pieces, I did my massive 30 by 40 inch paintings with the Toku toucan. This one I kind of like because it has a lot of the values that I enjoy in this series, where I have the Jesuit ruins, which is decaying humanity, inspired by Jesuit ruins in Paraguay. And Iguazu Falls is in kind of Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, triple border kind of place, close there. And I had a really great encounter with toucans in that place, so that's why I put a toucan there. So then I have this Antarctica piece, which doesn't have a whole lot of the symbolism, but Antarctica itself is a symbol for the pure wilderness that I want to raise up in a divine way in this series. And Antarctica was just such a powerful experience for me. I have a little bit more information about this piece later. So, Impressionism versus photorealism. Why do I portray my subjects more in an impressionistic style than a realistic style? So here are some of the pros for each of the styles. With Impressionism, I feel more reliant on color and composition. It draws more attention to symbolism and the concept at large, and it has a very raw and organic feel as I'm painting it and as you're looking at it. I felt like a raw and organic feel was vastly important to really get across the whole meaning of my work, and so that's why I chose this style. Formerly, I painted in a realistic style, and I recognized the pros for that as well. It's more popular at face value for people who don't really have the analytical skills of the art world, and it clearly displays my knowledge of the medium. Like I know how to use the medium. When people look at my realistic work, they're like, "Oh, you really know how to use paint. You really know how to paint, don't you?" Whereas when they look at my impressionistic work, it's like, "Oh, a kindergartner could do that." It's kind of the culture right now. So, but the realism, you could also, it's sharp detail. It shows that I really have an understanding of light and form. So here are some of my influences, some of the most important people for this particular series. Professor Charles Bergman, absolutely huge inspiration for everything I do. He taught courses that inspired my ideas. He introduced me to birding and how to experience nature through literature and photography and how to bird. So, I mean, just a massive inspiration. He's very supportive. He's expressive. He's unbelievably intellectual. And the courses that I had with him are, I met him in my Shakespeare class 2013. I was really into Shakespeare after my high school IB English course, and I thought maybe I could take it for fun here at PLU. And then after that, he invited me to join him on his Antarctica course, and that was a huge turning point in my life. Massive amount of inspiration from that course, and completely changed the way I thought about everything. And then we went to Ecuador, Galapagos, Peru, and that just continued the train that he started with Antarctica. My other major influence is my mother. She is a Florida resident, so I get to go visit her in Florida, which has a wonderful ecosystem there, even though it's been absolutely decimated by human industrialization. And she was a exchange student in Paraguay when she was in, I believe, college. So she has a lot of connections in Paraguay. So we take medical supplies and prosthetics to Paraguay, and while I'm there, I get to write and photograph and experience the culture of South America. She is also a poet, traveler, and writer like me, and she has put sacrificial amounts of support into my pursuing this project and these ideas. And same with my father. He has put massive steps towards supporting my passions. So some of the trips that I've been with her, I mean, I've been to Florida and Wisconsin many times to see family there, and Paraguay 3 or 4 times now. So here are some of the subjects that I got to experience personally. The far left is the toucan, the toku toucan, the roseate spoonbill in Florida, the broad-billed motma, and the red-footed booby. All of these I used as reference pictures for my paintings. And that's usually how I go about painting each of the subjects, is I actually photograph the subject and then I paint from my own photographs. Here are the landscapes that I painted from. So Iguazu Falls on the far left, the Galapagos right under that, and then in Antarctica up in the top right. It shows, kind of captures Antarctica. It has icebergs, has the mountains, the folding volcanic rocks, and the penguins themselves in their group, as well as that random pole that's sticking out of the rocks from who knows what. It shows that humanity is only a temporary presence there. And below that is a landscape of the cloud forest in Ecuador. So, acrylic versus oil. Why do I work in acrylic? So, acrylic dries as fast as I can work, and acrylic dries as fast as I can think about what I want to do next. So, as I'm working and developing an acrylic piece, I can just go, and as a marathon kind of painter where I work for 5 hours at a time, it sucks to have to be wet on wet painting all the time. So I enjoy how quickly acrylic dries, and it's easier and safer to work with. I can paint with it in my room without worrying about horrible fumes or headaches or anything. With oil, you get a richer, deep color, and it's easier to render textures, except with acrylic, I mix in mediums so that I can get similar textures in acrylic, such as glossy, thick mediums and molding paste, which makes it dry as it was put on in a 3D kind of format. And then oil is more traditionally respected and recognized as a painter's choice. So what's up with the Antarctica piece? Antarctica is relatively devoid of human influence. There's some 5,000 temporary inhabitants and then 0 permanent inhabitants of Antarctica. It's a massive continent, and for it to have that few amount of people is kind of amazing to me and inspiring. Antarctica itself is a symbol of wilderness that has yet to be has yet to be fully exploited by people. I really hate visiting places that are like cities and totally urbanized places. It's just a huge drainer on my soul. I don't have any other way to describe it, really. And then I feel like it's wrong in imposing religious symbolism and overall symbolism, well, religious symbolism to something so purely wild. It's so far removed from humanity that I feel like if I imposed a human symbol to it, then it wouldn't follow along with the whole philosophy of Antarctica. And it's impossible to overcome the novelty of penguins and see the underlying conceptual experience anyway. So if I painted a penguin with a halo, people would think, oh, it's a penguin. A penguin. Penguin. So to have it displayed this way, then it pries at people more. It's more ambiguous, and I think that way it's more appealing. So here are some of my examples of success as a naturalist, starting with the far left. So I discovered this bug. Well, I didn't discover this bug, but I found this bug on PLU's campus, and it had very few records of it ever being this far north, and it means that insects are taking advantage of the warmer climate and changing their migration patterns. And PLU didn't have a specimen of this species, so I collected the species and I gave it to PLU, and so PLU now has a species with my name on, or a specimen with my name on it, which I feel like is contributing to the world of science. And with the middle one, I went to Peru and talked to people living in the Sacred Valley around Machu Picchu and how industrialization and the development of the land there has affected wildlife in general. And it has pushed out all the birds and native species, and with this loud train going through the valley, it echoes and reverberates throughout the valley and scares away all the birds. So you hardly see any of the natural fauna in the Sacred Valley that the Inca would have seen on the Sacred Trail. And the far left, I found this species of tropical harvestman in Paraguay. I submitted a picture of this to PLU, and PLU said it's an opaline, which is a kind of spider, but it's more of a daddy longleg relative. And so they put me in contact with the entomologist at the American Natural History Museum, and I had a wonderful conversation with the entomologist there, and I feel like I was on the frontier of science when I was describing and trying to find the scientific literature about what species of opaline this might be. And there was only one really sparse Brazilian paper that I could find about it. So what are my future plans? Continue pushing the gallery train, always having something in display in galleries. My wildlife photography is pretty popular, and I always can find a place for that. I would like to start displaying my paintings more in galleries. And through that, I'm making connections and getting invited to events and doing speeches and stuff like that. So I'm just going to continue trying to spread my influence and my art. I'm going to continue trying to travel as much as I can and build up more inspiration, but I need to stay on top of the artwork as well in conjunction with that. I was accepted to visit Antarctica in 2017 with Professor Charles Bergman again, this time as more of a TA kind of role where I'm a mentor for other students, and I will be working on my next book and writings and paintings there on that trip. So while all this is happening, I'm refining my painting skills, I'm teaching my painting skills, and I'm continuing with my nature photography. I am continuing to refine my online presence with sales and image licensing, possibly, once I get into that rabbit hole. And then I'm continuing my education, hopefully with a degree in ecology, and perhaps pursuing teaching as a long-term job, because I really enjoy teaching people how to paint and take pictures and express themselves visually. So thank you for your attention. This background picture is taken near Planui Island, and we were watching this minke whale that's in the water in that dark spot there. And I hope this is inspirational for you, and I'm totally open to any questions you may have. Thank you for watching.